This is a KRQE Winter Weather Special.
Welcome to the KRQE News 13 Winter Weather Special. Over the next half hour, we'll look at what you can expect this winter. Will it be a great year for ski resorts? Or are we going to have another late season thanks to La Nina? We'll have all those answers and more, and we'll sit down with a meteorologist from the National Weather Service here at Albuquerque to discuss this historic year of weather from fires to floods. But first, forecasting the type of precipitation we see during any winter can be tricky. With how to figure out whether it's going to snow or rain, here's meteorologist Erica Meyer.
Yeah, Grant, during the winter, we can see all different types of precipitation. It all depends on the temperature of the atmosphere at different levels. So for rain, of course, this is what we see most of the year here in New Mexico. That's when we have below freezing temperatures high in the sky and above freezing temperatures for most of the temperature profile in the atmosphere. This causes even any snow that we see aloft to melt and form into rain as it falls to the ground. Then we have freezing rain, and what happens during freezing rain is we have cold air aloft and a thick warm layer of air, but near the surface temperatures may be right around 32 degrees. So as that rain does fall towards the ground, it ends up freezing on contact, and this can be one of our most dangerous types of precip because it can lead to black ice on the roads, it can attach to power lines causing power outages, and it can even bring down trees and branches. Now when we have cold air aloft and a shallow layer of warm air, that causes that snow to melt and then refreeze in the nice cold air towards the surface, creating some sleet, which is icy. And cold air for the entire profile can lead to, of course, snow. And for a look at how snowflakes form, let's send things over to Zoe Mintz.
Thanks, Erica. And a snowflake does actually form when an extremely cold water droplet it freezes onto a dust particle, and this creates an ice crystal. As it falls to the ground, more water freezes and builds even more crystals. And as it grows, you'll begin to see 6 distinct branches. The reason that snowflakes have 6 arms, but no 2 snowflakes are alike. The shape of each flake is actually determined by the weather it experiences as it falls. It might begin to grow arms in one way, and then minutes or even seconds later, slight changes in the environment cause the crystal to grow in a completely different direction. Individual snowflakes all follow different paths from the sky to the ground, and therefore all snowflakes are unique, but a lot of snow piling up can create some significant impacts, from watches to even advisories and warnings. Here's meteorologist Eric DeBroca with all the information you might need.
All right, well, thanks there, Zoe. Several categories here is what we normally have for classifying, let's say, different types of a winter weather advisories. First, we're going to start, though, with that watch, and that just means that we're going to have a storm on the horizon here. You definitely need to pay attention to that. Advance notice that a winter storm is going to be arriving to our area here, and a better than 50% chance that will be upgraded to a warning. Now, as far as an advisory goes, it could be downgraded, although that's usually less than 50% chance there, but nonetheless, still need to be aware. And normally when you see an advisory issues, that is more of just a nuisance or an inconvenience, say on the roadways, can still create some very slippery conditions there on the roadways and still need to allow maybe some extra time for those commutes. When you see the winter storm warning, that is the highest category that we have. Certainly need to really pay attention there for sure, take action, as those road conditions can certainly get dangerous, and really want to plan even avoiding those roads, especially at that hour here, as conditions will deteriorate rather quickly there. That's even why having supplies in your car, even extra water available or even some blankets, is always a good idea. And as far as just how important, though, all the snowfall is, here's meteorologist Grant Tuster.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, we know how important snow is here in New Mexico, especially for the health of the Rio Grande, which makes up our culture, our identity here in New Mexico. And that basin spans a large area stretching from southern Colorado through most of New Mexico, down along the Mexican and Texas border, stretching all the way, eventually emptying down into the Gulf of Mexico. But for us here in New Mexico, we really watch the snowpack up into the northern mountains and into the San Juan Mountains in southern Colorado. This is the water that truly feeds the river and leaves it flowing all year long. So it's these snow totals that fall up into the northern mountains and into southern Colorado that really play a role in the health of the river throughout the year. As in the spring, that snow melts all the way through summer, flowing down into the Rio Grande, eventually continuing to travel south. It does gain a little bit of speed here as it meets with the Rio Trauma just outside of Espanola. It'll continue to flow south, helping to feed acequias across northern and central New Mexico, eventually flowing here through Albuquerque. And that water continues its path southward through all of New Mexico, eventually spilling all the way down into Elephant Butte Lake, for example, where unfortunately this lake continues to struggle. Down there right now, the lake is sitting at only 7.4% full, but 6 months ago you noticed an increase. That was in part thanks to the snowmelt and emptying some of that water down south. But what we truly need is a lot of snowfall up into the northern mountains to really help keep the health of the Rio Grande. Everybody knows how tough the last 2 winters have been thanks to back-to-back La Niñas here in New Mexico. Now this year we will see a rare third La Niña. With a look at what that could mean this winter, here is meteorologist Eric DeBroca.
All right, well, thanks, Grant. For just that, we saw now 3 consecutive years for those La Niña conditions, and what we're exactly talking about are the cooler than average waters here over in the eastern part of the Pacific Ocean. And so that really drives our weather patterns here, as we'll show you what this exactly means. So as we look at, say, some of the past, we can see it is rare to see 3 years in a row of the La Niña conditions. Follow this black line, though, and notice that everywhere it is below 0 here, or at least cooler than average waters is what that means, where we're looking at right around 1 degree below average for us. And actually our forecast as we go later into the winter, especially more so into the spring, a very important part here, conditions do look more likely to at least trend more towards the neutral conditions for us here, to even kind of get us back closer to the other side of things there. But as far as the winter goes, look at this, 75% chance of us sticking through that triple dip La Niña. And of course that has a big impact on just exactly how this winter will shape up for us. Generally speaking, now what that looks like, drier than average conditions that will set up across the southern tier of the United States, which does include us here in New Mexico. Notice though that jet stream far enough to the north still can see some pretty good storms in Colorado. That's what the forecast looks like now. As far as why La Niña brings those drier conditions, here's meteorologist Zoe Mintz.
Yes, I'm sure many of you have heard La Niña, El Nino, or even just neutral conditions, but what exactly does all of that mean? It has a lot to do with equatorial sea surface temperatures. Like Eric showed you, we are looking at below average sea surface temperatures in the eastern Pacific, and that is a sure sign that an La Niña, has begun to set up. With warmer conditions across the western parts of the Pacific, that is going to allow for warm, moist air to rise, and we all know what happens when more moist air rises. It creates some thunderstorms, stormy conditions, and a lot more precipitation across the western Pacific. But here in the eastern Pacific, check out what happens as the air kind of circulates back across the equator. It descends as it goes towards those cooler water, and descending air is also mostly drier air. So that descending air over the eastern part of the Pacific does create much drier conditions that really reduces our rainfall amounts, and that's most likely what's going to continue into the winter ahead of us. So La Niña conditions do create drier air on the eastern Pacific, wetter air in the western Pacific, but for us in the southeastern part of the United States, it is going to be leading to drier than normal conditions. And with this being the 3rd year in a row with La Niña conditions, it's not the only time that we have seen a triple dip. Meteorologist Erica Meyer will break down the details on those other years.
Thanks, Zoe. That's right. And it is true that we have seen this happen before. However, it is very rare, as we've mentioned. In fact, there have only been 2 other sets of triple dip La Niña years. And we call these our analog years, or some years that we can compare to. So back in 1973 to 1976, we did see that La Niña. Same with 1998 to 2001, another triple dip La Niña. During that first one in 1975 to 1976, we saw above average temperatures by 1.3 degrees, but we also saw below average precipitation. And this was a strong La Nina. Our average sea surface temperatures were below average by 1.3 degrees. Now, back in 2000 to 2001, in that third year of the triple dip La Nina, our actual precipitation was above average and our temperatures were also above average. So it was a little bit different. And for this La Nina, we saw a slightly more weak La Nina. So we don't have an exact trend for what's going to happen. It's not too significant for this year to know exactly how this is going to play out for us. But we do have a look at our winter forecast. And for that, let's send things over to Grant.
Thank you, Erica. The moment we've all been waiting for. We can compile all this information we were just looking at, create a better idea, a better forecast on what is going to happen this winter. So here is what you can expect. Unfortunately, with that triple dip La Nina continuing, we're likely going to still hang on to these above average temperatures across all of New Mexico, with the highest confidence of above average temperatures, especially across southern and southeastern parts of the state. But the big question is, what's going to happen when it comes to snow and rain? Well, here's the latest thinking. This is lining up pretty closely still with the La Nina conditions that are going to stick around through the winter, where we typically see drier than average conditions across almost all of New Mexico, with even drier conditions down towards the international border. However, there is a little bit of hope, especially up into far southern Colorado. This is where we could kind of see that nose of above average moisture move in, hopefully still bring us an average or even slightly above average snowpack up across the San Juan Mountains, for instance, into southern Colorado. Some of that may briefly get into far northern parts of the state. So overall, here's what you can expect this winter. Temperatures are most likely going to remain above average over the course of the winter through February, potentially even into March. Of course, we're still going to have some cold spells here across the state, but that's going to be the overall trend. Most of us are going to be looking at below average to potentially near average precipitation through this winter, with likely drier and warmer conditions as we head through December. And then after that, as La Nina begins to weaken, it'll start to get a bit of a mixed bag, just like what we saw last year, with more periodic storm systems that'll move through, especially as we head into the end of the year. So the first half of the winter, it's likely going to start to dry out a little bit more, but hopefully once we get closer to the end of winter, that's when we'll start to get more of these storm systems to help really build up that snowpack across parts of northern New Mexico, and hopefully bring in some more moisture across much of the state as well. It's time now to sit down and talk with Daniel Porter here with the National Weather Service in Albuquerque. Daniel, I think it's fair to say that it has been a wild ride when it comes to weather this year, from fires to floods. Can you talk some about all the extremes we've seen this year?
Yeah, it has been an incredibly dry winter last year, and unfortunately that created very severe drought conditions across New Mexico. That set the stage up for a very dangerous fire weather pattern across New Mexico, particularly during the months of April and May. And then unfortunately we had those burn scars across various parts of the state, and with a very active monsoon season that we saw this past season here, that led to some burn scar flash flooding, unfortunately, across many parts of the state.
You know, we didn't have a great winter last year because of La Nina for the second year in a row. But then as we headed into spring of last year, what caused such extreme fire conditions?
Well, since we were already behind the curve with respect to drought, and the fuels out there were incredibly dry, so then when we brought in those strong winds from those storm systems that moved just to the north of New Mexico, unfortunately, as soon as we had one spark, that resulted in the flames moving very quickly across the state.
And we talked a lot about flash flooding and debris flows this past spring. Would you say that we saw more debris flow incidents than in other years?
That's absolutely true. That's just an artifact of how many acres that were burned across the entire area, particularly the Hermit's Peak burn scar up there in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. So when you have more areas that are burned, you increase your chances, certainly, for debris flows and flash flooding.
And with all the rain we got this last summer, too.
I was just going to mention that, Grant.
You guys were so busy this year issuing flash flood warnings across the entire state. I mean, do you know off the top of your head how many you issued?
Yeah, we issued 250 flash flood warnings across various parts of our area, which, to put it in perspective for our office, that's twice as many that we have ever issued in 1 year across our area. Yes.
Wow.
It was an insane year for the National Weather Service, issuing all those flash flood warnings across various parts of our area.
And even for the western part of our state, near the record wettest, right?
Yes, so across, if you take the monsoon season, which is basically from mid-June to the end of September, the western portions of the state saw the wettest monsoon season for that time period for over 100 years. In the central portions of the state, certainly was a top 10 event. Maybe not as much in the eastern part of the state, but we did see some flash flooding there as well.
You know, with how dry last winter was too, I think a lot of us were so nervous going into such a bad fire season if this year's monsoon was going to be good or not. Why did we have such an incredible monsoon after a La Nina year?
So typically when you do have a La Nina pattern, New Mexico does fairly well generally after a La Nina during the monsoon season. It just allows that high pressure to be in a better position for New Mexico to allow moisture to move into the region. And when you have better chances for moisture in the area, daytime heating, you have better chances for showers and thunderstorms throughout the area. So while we benefited significantly for the monsoon season, it did come with a challenge, certainly with the burn scar flash flooding.
All right, Daniel. Well, thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break right now, but when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation here with Daniel and all of us meteorologists too. We're going to talk more about this upcoming winter, some of the hazards, and of course, how you can stay safe. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back again. We are joined here with Daniel Porter from the National Weather Service here in Albuquerque. Daniel, we just talked about how extreme earlier this year was, from the fire season to the monsoons, but now we're getting ready to head into winter. And what can people be aware of in order to stay, or how to stay safe this winter?
Well, as you probably already know, triple dip La Nina is in our forecasts. And unfortunately, as we know, La Nina is not very favorable for storm systems moving through our region. So the odds are going to be tilted a little bit more for a drier than normal season across the area. If there was going to be one exception, potentially along the Colorado border, where we might be a little closer to near normal across that area.
Now, last year, we ended up seeing a great late season for snowfall. We picked up several storms and the most of our winter snow during the months of late February and March. However, the La Nina didn't necessarily weaken significantly during that time. Can you explain any reason why that would be for us to still get so many storms?
Well, I mean, La Nina is just tilts your odds a little bit to lower chances for storm systems to move through the region. But that doesn't necessarily mean that storms won't move through the area. And not all La Ninas are created equal. So during that time frame, as we go through the transitional period from winter to spring, storm systems do try to move their way through the region. And we were fortunate last year to get some storm systems to move through the region. And that could be something we'd be looking at again this year.
Well, especially with going to maybe a more neutral La Nina during the later part of the season?
That's a possibility.
Okay.
Models are suggesting that we could be getting a little closer to neutral, but models also have a bias or a trend in which they try to pull us out of La Nina a little quicker than what actually does happen, which was the case last couple of years, and so that's why we're a little hesitant to think that we're going to come directly out of La Nina a little quicker than what the models suggest.
Okay.
But you do think that this year possibly has that chance to see more late season snowfall compared to earlier in the season?
That's certainly a possibility, obviously. As you know, we always have that storm system either in Christmas or New Year's time, and we can always bank on that. We can always typically bank on a good snowstorm mostly in the spring months. So we have to always be prepared throughout the entire year, whether it's in November, December, or maybe it's even March, April, or May.
So what are some of the biggest hazards we typically see during the winter months here in New Mexico? What can we watch out for?
Well, obviously the snow threat, and so you always need to stay up to date with the latest forecast. Stay tuned to that in advance and prepare. You might need to delay your travel plans, or maybe go before the storm and get back to your final location before the storm starts. The other issue is the cold, certainly. I think we always forget about the cold. And you certainly don't want to be leaving space heaters on in your home when you're not home or what have you. Carbon monoxide poisoning is also a threat as well. So be careful, be prepared.
And really quick, if we go through this winter again looking at below average precipitation, what could that mean for fire season next year?
Unfortunately, it could be another repeat of what we just saw this past year. I mean, we are already in drought still across the region. If we continue to see below normal precipitation across New Mexico, that will certainly worsen the drought across the area. And as storm systems come through during the springtime months with La Nina, typically they're a little further north of New Mexico. we'll see those strong winds move through New Mexico. So again, we're going to have to be prepared for another potentially busy fire weather season.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Daniel. We really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us at home during this year's winter weather special. Of course, you can always stay up to date on krqe.com and on our news app. We'll see you next time.